citing some science behind it also, understanding the nature of why people resist change. And we're gonna discuss these 5 things, starting with the force field analysis and ending with a deeper tool that's more 3-dimensional than the force field analysis, which is polarity management. So I'm going to introduce that shortly. Excuse me. But first, please stand up. Please stand up, everyone. Stand up. And then find someone you don't know. And then introduce yourself to that person. Find someone you don't know. Sit together with your new friend. Okay. And briefly discuss this question with your new friend. What forms of resistance to change? This is actually from a scientific journal. Again, individuals' behavior in response to perceived or actual threat. So here it's defining change as a threat. And if you trace back to human evolution, when we were still primitive, like we have this primitive brain, right? We have a core brain, which is inside our, this bigger brain, which is called like the amygdala. And it controls the fight, flight, or freeze mechanism. And it was very important in our primitive times for our survival. What does this mean? Imagine a very hostile environment where there's a lot of wild animals going around in the forest. And when you confronted them, you had to assess whether this animal is a threat, right, or food. You either fight it or it will eat you, right? So this is our primitive brain, and we still have that primitive brain. It still kicks in when it senses change. Okay, it also says it may be preceded by and amplified through distrust, fear, and communication barriers. So you can see some of the elements that need to be addressed when we are dealing with change. So I'm going to present these 5 tips, first of which is do a force field analysis. So typically when we start analyzing or diagnosing an organization and its readiness for change, we have a lot of tools. But I'm going to share you this specific tool because it allows you to start very quickly. Okay. So this one is called the force field analysis, which was introduced by this guy, Kurt Lewin, a sociologist, who actually was persecuted. He was a Jew, so he was persecuted in Nazi Germany. So he fled, he went to the US, and he started thinking about why is there persecution and why is there like these kinds of actions from society. And he started developing some tools for diagnosing. So on the left side, you will see the forces that drive change or are for change. And on the right side are the forces against change. And you can see there are arrows that are opposing each other. In the middle, you write down the change that needs to happen. So I'm going to give you an example. This one came from an actual consultancy that we had before, not in my current company. So this was a very big company, which was a multinational financial institution, and it had about 3,000 employees. Most of them are executive assistants. And it was a very simple change. Some of you are already smiling reading the description, right? It was, do you still remember WordPerfect? So they were using DOS. The operating system was DOS. This was in the 90s. And by that time, Windows was already like very popular. It was like Windows 95 or something. But they were still using DOS because they needed WordPerfect, which didn't have a Windows version at that time. So the executive assistants stuck on using WordPerfect, but everything already switched to Windows. So the whole IT department switched to Windows, and their training and skills moved on to supporting Windows software. So the problem was, no one was left to support WordPerfect. a word processor, okay? So they said, okay, we will gather everyone, we will train you to use Microsoft Windows and Microsoft Word, and they let it go at that. It so happened that the executive assistants had this bulletin board, if you're familiar with the bulletin board, the electronic bulletin board, right? Like now it's like blogs and social media, but there you can post comments. And that's how they express their resistance. They actually put a lot of heated, all caps comments about the change. And you can see some of them here. We love WordPerfect. You've been lousy at tech support, so why are you punishing us now? This is going to slow us down, and we're already buried in work. Like we're transcribing a lot of things, and now you're going to slow down our performance even further. How many of you recognize these symptoms, right? So, okay. And of course, the unexpressed statement here was, we are not ready. But they couldn't say it because then their competence was going to be questioned. And they feared that they would get fired because of that. And they were actually organizing a strike just because of MS Word. So this demonstrates to you the importance of the ability to understand where people are coming from. And you will see at once the benefit of sitting down before you implement anything that can be drastic, that will affect people's lives, right, and jobs, and then just write down things. Okay? So, like I said, it's a force field analysis is an estimate of how ready is your organization. How ready are your staff or employees to change? It's a way to start the conversations and a way to make visible your assumptions. Maybe you're assuming it's very easy because you are tech guys, right? It's easy to switch. I did it myself in 2 days. But the executive assistants don't necessarily possess those technical skills. Okay, so how do you do it? You gather everyone. You explain the force field analysis. There's a lot of samples also on the web, and then you give them sticky notes. And that's what we did with the change management team. Sticky notes, and then ask them to write down 3 to 5 forces that are driving the change and 3 to 5 forces that are against change. And then you do a post-it board, and you cluster them, and then if needed, you vote for the most important ones. Okay. And then you discuss. Like user stories or like the product backlog, this is not a static document, right? It's just a guess. And you validate it continuously. You sit down and say, is this still relevant? So, for example, this readiness thing, right? They tried to address it with a workshop and a training, but apparently that wasn't enough because they felt they were still not ready. So what was needed actually was to engage them almost at a one-on-one level. Like there's a hotline they will call, and then actually a technical assistant will go there and help them fix the problem. This was before the age of videos in intranets. Yeah. Okay. So I'm going to share the slides also later. But I'm also going to give you some time to take down some notes. Okay. Any questions before we go on about force field analysis? I'm going to give you now a situation, and then where was that? Here. Okay? And discuss with your friend or your seatmate the forces for change and forces against change if we're asking you to switch from Slack to Microsoft Teams. from Slack to Microsoft Teams. Okay, or any other messaging software that you prefer, instant messaging. So please discuss very quickly. I'm going to give you 2 minutes to discuss. So discuss forces for change and forces against change. And this is like, we keep on asking what their reasons for resisting are, but we're forgetting we are also people, and we also have reasons for resisting, right? So if you examine, do a self-reflection, what are your reasons for resisting? For example, can you do this? Okay. Science shows that when you do this, you always do it this way. So either your left hand over the right, your left finger, but the other way around, try it. How do you feel now?
Weird.
It's weird, right? It's not comfortable. So when I teach change management also, I ask people like, who are right-handed when you write? What's right hand? Okay. Who are left-handed? So often majority is right-handed. So for the right-handed, if I ask you to write the English alphabet using your left hand, how would that feel? It's going to be hard. And the other way around for the left-handed too, because you are used to writing on your right hand. When I ask you and force you to write on your left hand, you're going to resist. Your body is physically going to resist too, because it's not used to it. So discomfort, awkwardness, and unfamiliarity. This creates fear, right, and discomfort, okay? So, I'm gonna dig deep into some research, and this is a classic study, which was done in a US factory by these guys, Coach and French. The scenario is like a factory where the workers are paid per item that they assemble, per part, and it's called like a per piece or piece rate, okay? And the company was going to introduce a minor change in the process of assembling that part. The reason for this is that they wanted to reduce error and also make the process more efficient. And if you make the process more efficient, then the cost of assembling also gets reduced. So bear those in mind, okay? And so the social scientists saw this as an opportunity to conduct a research. And they divided the workers into 4 groups. Essentially, they became 2 groups, but I'll explain that later on. So the first group was no participation, meaning they had no say or contribution in how to change that, or how to make that minor change in the process. Okay. Management simply called them and said, this is your new way of working. Okay. The second one, representation. So this meant that the workers assigned a leader who would go to a training and have conversations with management, and then they would go back to the workers and teach the workers the new process. So that's representation. And then the third and fourth group were not different, so I'm just going to call them the third group. Total participation. This is where management assembled the workers and then discussed the goals of the minor change, and then they asked the workers, how would you change the process given these goals and outcomes? Okay, so guess, I'm going to show you 2 graphs about the drop in performance and the increase in performance. But before I show that, can you discuss again with your neighbors what you think will happen to the performance of the 4 groups or the 3 groups? Okay, so remember, the 3 groups are no participation, representation, total participation. So discuss. I'm going to give you 2 minutes for this. Discuss the performance as you go through time. Okay, so while you're discussing, I'm going to show you the 2 graphs. There are only 2 graphs because... Okay. Which one do you think corresponds to the 3 groups? So what happened was, as soon as they discussed and implemented it, the performance dropped and struggled to get up again. By performance, it means the number of pieces that they assembled, right? The parts that they assembled. Okay. And the scientists also noticed that they were showing like physical signs of resistance, like anger during meetings. There was this, the paper actually describes an encounter, several encounters, but the paper quotes one, and it went like this. The engineer, who was part of management, was talking to a worker, and the engineer said, so this is for non-participation, okay? Number 1. The engineer said, here are the parts, okay? Try the new process. And the worker said, like, looked at the parts, and then tried assembling, and then it fell apart, and the worker said, it doesn't work. Resistance. And there was no engagement at all in the behavior, like the mannerism, the eyes. So the social researchers were observing the behavior. Now, it turns out, surprisingly, that number 2 and number 3 were the same. Those who had representation and those who had total participation exhibited this kind of graph. A drop in performance as they struggled to understand the new process, and then slowly exceeding like the original performance. Very surprising. Well, I guess it was expected, but the fact that it rose beyond that is actually the surprise. What do you think happened? So they were like, they felt that they were contributing, right? They had ownership. They had ownership of the change. So you see, it's actually a very old experiment, but it still proves that engagement is one of the most important ways to manage resistance. Okay. So this one is from an actual experience that I had. Okay. This was a telco, and these are some of the activities that we did to engage the employees. Okay. We had regular, let me first give you a background. So this telco, you know, like the mobile companies, right? They evolved from like a landline, and then they started doing mobile as a side venture, but then mobile telephony took off, and then SMS, text messaging, took off, right? But because they were only catching up, their systems were unprepared for it. So what was happening was their mobile messaging was built on Linux. Their systems were like direct from the hardware, from the base stations. It was collecting like the usage, and that was all aggregated manually by someone who was pulling the data from the hardware and then pushing it to a database, and then someone would manually generate like your accounting, your billing. So like for example, this is very important in prepaid accounts. Like, so if you ever had a prepaid account, you wanted to know, do I still have credits or do I need to top up? This was manual. And it took 3 days before in this telco, or even a week before it would be able to update, because there's virtually in each step of the process, there's some guy pulling the data and then putting it in Excel files, right? And then converting that into CSV files, which got loaded into the billing and invoicing system. And if you dialed up and asked, how much credit do I have, some guy would actually make those queries to pull the data. That's why it took like over a day for you to get to know what your credits are. Okay, so the telco decided, because it was quickly expanding, the telco hired a systems integrator that would automate all of these systems. Okay, so I'm going to show you the force field of that later on. But this is what happened. People started, like the employees started fearing that they would lose their jobs. Because once you automate, that word automation always meant one person or a couple of people in some department are going to lose their jobs because they were the ones pulling the data. Okay? And imagine the consequences. If people are unhappy about this, they could actually damage the business. They could really do damage. Okay? And the problem was that the company needed these people for the transition because they knew the process, they knew the data sources. So the company said, we are going to assign you to this project, which will automate what you're doing. So already there's fear, right? And they're already being very cautious about it. So how did we manage the resistance here? One of them was, we had regular pulse check sessions. Basically, because they're all busy during the project, we would hold like 7 a.m. breakfast, 7 to 8 a.m. breakfast. People will go, we will have like breakfast together, and then we will ask them a series of questions, like informally, conversations, not very formal. We would ask them, how are you guys doing? What do you think needs to be done? What are your concerns? And then we would write this down, and we would make additional activities to address these concerns. We also had getting to know you sessions, because when the systems integrators came in, they got mixed up with the employees, and they were multicultural. There were people from India, from Singapore, from Greece, from the US, from Israel, and they all had different ways of working. And one person from a different culture will be working with this way, and the other person will be suspecting, what is he doing? Why is he behaving this way? As simple as, for example, the way Indians communicate, yes is like, yeah, or shake your head, right? And then nodding is actually like not really yes, it's more like no. But this one is yes. As simple as that. Or as simple as, like for example, because this was based in the Philippines, when people are like having a snack or eating a meal together, when they invite you, they really mean for you to join them. Whereas in other cultures, when they invite you, it's actually, or they won't even invite you at all. Like when they're having a meal and like someone will pass by, they are actually expecting to be invited, even if they don't expect to eat. So those little things actually created a lot of friction. So what we did was we held these getting to know you sessions and explained to them, when I work, this is what I do. And then these are the quirks we noticed, these are the differences we noticed. And they started conversing and like having more congruence and having more compatibility. Okay. And then of course, town hall, question and answer with the CIO. Every month, the CIO would visit the project location. So we had one big location, one floor, and the CIO would come and we would set up stuff, and he would give a status, and then some of the project leaders would also give status, and then people would ask questions. And some would be afraid to ask questions. So we gave anonymous ways to send questions, like anonymous drop boxes. Today we have Mentimeter and Slido. We didn't have those at that time. So our audio way was like a physical Dropbox where people can drop their questions and concerns. And then we had custom off-site workshops. I specified off-site because this is also important. People got tired of meeting in the same location. So it was actually good incentive for them to be invited to a hotel, and then we would have meals together there, and then we would have workshops. And of course, we had movie time. After a major milestone was done, the company rented a nearby theater, and we would all go and watch a movie. So simple things. Massage time. We actually brought massage therapists, and while people were sitting in their chairs, people would give them back and shoulder massage. Okay? And people were so happy with this. Sometimes we also had karaoke time. And then anonymous drop boxes. Okay, so having discussed these, can you discuss with your seatmate what forms of interventions or activities have you done to address resistance to change? Please, I'm going to give you a minute to discuss with your seatmates. What other ideas or activities that you've tried to address resistance to change? Yes?
Just to make sure I understand correctly, so these are one of the ways that we can engage with employees to adapt with changes?
It's not about adapting to the changes, but feeling how they are feeling. Because then we can help them adapt to the change. So it's like one step before they can adapt. Okay, so for example, if they're feeling very stressed, we would say, oh, it's time for another massage time.
Is it like ice-breaking activity?
It's kind of like that, but also moving towards having more relationship. Because each time we did these activities, we brought them together actually and talked to them more. So, for example, also, the business analysts, they had friction with the developers, right? This is typical. And then also the QA people also had friction with the developers, right? So whenever we brought them together, like breakfast or massage time, they started talking to each other, right? That's a really good question. So some of the activities we did for getting to know you, we asked them to bring like a photograph of their family or what they do outside of work. It's really to build the relationship. 5 minutes, okay. Oh, okay, I have to hurry. We have 5 minutes. I'm gonna speed through this. Okay. Number three is related to number 2. Okay, it's about engaging. So you listen, learn, and act so that they feel seen and heard. So I'm gonna speed through this because it's also related to number 4 and 5. Okay, so this is a contrarian view from this author, and I highly recommend this book, 7 Rules for Positive Production Change by Esther Derby. It's very rare, and because I teach, I often research readings about organizational change. And if you look at the authors, who are the familiar authors? John Clutter, right? Heifetz. So they're all white males. That's the problem. And if you look at it, they always try to say, hey, we have to build a sense of urgency. And it actually stresses people more. Esther Derby changes the perspective and says, maybe it's not resistance, maybe we should call it lack of congruence. Congruence meaning, do we really understand where the people are coming from, what their situation is, and what their context is. And that's why at the start of this talk, I asked you, like, what makes you resist things? Because when you are put in that spot, you are going to resist too. So have empathy with the people who are, quote unquote, blocking the change. So here, Congruence is about balancing the concerns of people who want the change. So that could be us as Agile coaches and Scrum Masters and product owners, right? Who want the change, balance it with those who are being asked to change. Because if the roles were reversed, if you were being asked to change back to waterfall, you're going to resist. Right? Oh, some of you are laughing, but yes, right? So congruence enables communication, problem solving, and creativity. Okay. Ooh, stop. Okay. So the fourth one is also building empathy. Examine the history of change. There's something called change fatigue. So in the telco, when I went there, I noticed that people would say, oh, here's another change. Oh, another change consultant. And somehow from conversation with them, I detected that there was a subtext. There was another meaning, which was, you're not gonna last, I'm just gonna outlast you because I'm an employee, you're a consultant. You're on a temporary project. Okay, so that's change fatigue. Like, this company was so quote unquote innovative, they kept on having innovation projects and the people were tired. And they were like, okay, another change coming and I just need to wait it out. Okay, so what might be your reasons to fear change? Think about it. What might be your reasons to fear change? Here are some, okay. Here are some based on research. Fear of failure. Loss of face. We were talking about this, Jack, right? Loss of face. And the loss of face is very complicated and intricate. Because, for example, if they're like we were talking about, why aren't people telling me feedback? Because they're trying to save their face too. And so in some cultures, when you tell them feedback direct, they are losing face. And it's a big deal in some cultures, right? So you have to do it in a way that they don't lose face. Okay. Uncertainty, of course. We talked about this, the awkwardness, the unfamiliarity of it. Competence. Do I have the skill to do the change? And will I lose my job? Which is actually, this is loss of control, fear of job loss, past baggage. So not the same as the telco, in another company, there was a previous change which they really like hyped it up. Like the new CIO said, oh, we're going to innovate, blah, 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 blah. And then he promised a lot of incentives, and then it failed. Nothing happened. And then they swept it under the rug, meaning they tried to bury it and never discuss it again. So it was only whispering. And it's hard when that happens because this is the change fatigue thing again. They will say, okay, this is going to fail again and nobody's going to talk about it again. So it builds a lot of apathy or indifference, right? The people don't care anymore. Of course, more work. You're asking us to do more work. And this is always obvious, right? Because there's going to be a drop of performance on top of the things that you're already doing, right? You're already rushing things. You're already trying to make things like, you're trying to glue things together, make things work. You're actually you're like pulling all your superpowers, and then they ask you to do more work. So be aware of these things. Okay, this was the telco situation. So they wanted to switch to near real-time account reconciliation and billing, and the question from the employee's mind was, am I gonna lose my job? Of course, when you integrate, then you can deliver your services faster, your mobile services. Oops. And they just interpreted it as more work, okay? Better customer satisfaction. Can I return to my old position? And that was a question that was always being asked by the employees who were assigned to the project. We are doing this to beat our competition, but do the employees really care, right? So I don't have the skills for the new system. More product offerings, more flexible than another innovation project. So each of these need to be answered, right? I think my time is up, so I'm gonna discuss the last one very quickly, sorry.
We have like 10 minutes for Q&A
Okay.
so...
Yes, so like I said, the fifth one is polarity management. This is a step ahead or in a level up from the force field analysis, and it was introduced by Dr. Barry Johnson. Johnson said transformation is a complex scenario of opposing views, which are polarities, so opposite poles, okay? And here's an example. Do we integrate or not integrate the accounting and billing systems? The traditional approach, which we often do, is we treat the opposite side as a problem to solve. Meaning, for example, because we are not integrating, because we're all manual, we need to solve that problem. But when you frame it that way, the people who are manually doing the integration will now feel threatened and even blamed for the problem. So you have to be careful. Now, this is how to switch it according to polarity management. Openly engage the two opposing views, and then instead ask, our goal is to improve our responsiveness to our customer needs. We need suggestions, sorry for the error. We need suggestions. So the way we frame this is actually opening up people for engagement, rather than treat it as a problem that we need to solve. This is polarity management. This is another example, but I'm gonna show it here. So a question of team empowerment versus limiting team power. And these are the arguments for empowering the team. And then these are the arguments why team power should be limited. This is often a dilemma in agile transformation, right? We need more team empowerment. And then finance and accounting will say, no, because the budget is gonna blow up, etc., etc. So this is the template for polarity management. Basically, you map out your higher purpose and what is your deeper fear here. And then these are the benefits or the values of this side, and then the fears of this side. So this is what can happen. So for example, here, centralized control, these are the benefits. Management wants visibility of what's happening. Isn't this always what they ask for, right? Management wants visibility. Central steering and control is always important because we want to control the budget. Whereas for empowered teams, they want to be more responsive to the market, and they want a culture of experimentation. And the fears of centralized controls are your budget is going to go wild, you will not be visible, and you're exposing yourself to risk and security issues. While on the other side, these are the fears, and if these fears are realized, then we're not going to compete. But mapping it this way and showing it to all parties actually makes it more inclusive. This is the power of polarity management. Often, this is what we see. We only see like the fears of each other, right? So what is saying is be open and engage both sides, widen your perspective, and then start discussing in an objective way, rather than doing debates or like, right? And because of that, both sides will feel heard and seen, and they are validated. It's a pragmatic approach, so be real. You gain the benefits of both sides, and it leads to more congruence. Okay? And so we end with this. When people are operating in this balance, they can access their best thinking, problem solving, and creativity. And congruence is the foundation for change by attraction, and it contributes to referent power. Referent power is like power out of respect, because you are fair and balanced, rather than forcing or dictatorial.